and thanks for coming out tonight. I mean, it's an exciting time to be doing organizing, to be coming to meetings and getting involved with groups and people who are like-minded. And you know, it's really exciting. I think in a lot of ways, part of that is the demonstrations that we've seen across the country. That photo on the cover of the newspaper, I was fortunate enough to be there. It was 10,000 people. And I think it really shows that we're in a new political moment. I think that's thanks, no doubt, in part to the fact that Sanders removed that stigma that Preston was talking about communism and socialism and all different ideas for a new system, and that's what we really need. And so, I mean, that night we made the banner with spontaneous volunteers off the street. We couldn't keep the flyers in our hands. And, you know, it was 10,000 people in San Francisco, but in a city like New York City, we had as many as 100,000 people come in the streets, and that's super exciting. And so I wanted to just shout that out. And, you know, I think we can be excited about the moment we're in. We can be excited about organizing, excited that we're in this meeting, excited to be building together. So, and it's also exciting in a way because it's had a unifying effect. You know, we're not building in a vacuum anymore. People who are seriously interested in building an anti-fascist movement, are seriously interested in opposing racism, bigotry, and all the other things that Trump represents, all across the United States are getting together, have stopped like sectarian activity, and so I think it really is a good litmus test in terms of how serious you are, as if you're willing to put aside differences and build with people. So that aside, I wanted to start the talk tonight with a political backdrop for what the Trump government really is. And so I wanted to say, first and foremost, that it's a racist, sexist, anti-LGBTQ, anti-immigrant, and a pro-war government. We can't get that twisted. That's what it is. And it's had little or no interest in improving the conditions for working people, whether they be black, brown, Asian, and even white. And it's not going to improve for anyone in the United States, but the government that Trump has appointed is, and we can see that from the cabinet, is meant to discipline the working class by threat of force and to resuming the profitable work that makes the rich richer. In that respect, the Trump government really amplifies the most backward sections of the ruling class. And this talk is about that. It's about those sections of the ruling class that Donald Trump's transition team is picking to be the lever pullers, the administrators, and the managers for the state, the capitalist state. But before getting into what that specifically means, I think we should make one other thing clear, and that's that the elections did not transform this country into a fascist country in the same way that the German election in 1933 did, and in the same way that the fascist coup d'etat in Italy did in 1922. It's not that situation here in the United States. And the reason for that is because there's no organized fascist movement. Germany had the brown shirts, Italy had the black shirts, and both were organized fascist militias that broke up progressive and revolutionaries meetings. They broke up workers' meetings with clubs, knives, and improvised weapons like chairs and mugs. Right? I mean, this is brutal street fighting. And the Spanish fascists, for their part, were a movement based in the Spanish military officers. And so in that way, too, they had a hand in an armed mass organization. And we don't see that, thankfully, today, but that's not to say that it can't happen. It's clear at present danger with Donald Trump in the White House. So today's fascist movement, speaking of, spans from the Ku Klux Klan to the so-called alt-right, which is not organized in the same way. There's a very broad variety of opinion within that fascist movement, and there are bitter divides that separate those different factions. And so it's important to keep that in mind, but it's also, I think, important, like I said, to keep in mind the growing number and unity between the fascist movement ever since Trump declared his candidacy, and now especially now that they got their guy in the White House. So I want to talk a little bit about what I've been asked to talk about, the cabinet. And I want to say, before we get into that, one last thing, and that's that everyone, I think, should be concerned about what's happening. It's no joke. I mean, in spite of there not being a fascist movement the same way there was, I think everyone in the United States now can see the clear and present danger that Trump's cabinet represents. And, you know, I say that not to be alarmist, not to scare people, but to inspire us to be in the streets, to come to meetings and get organized. So I'll begin with the people who are sure bets, the people that we know are going to be there after January the 20th. And so the sure picks, Mike Flynn, who is now the National Security Advisor to be, According to Sarah Morgan, the director of Human Rights Watch, and it's not necessarily a progressive organization, a liberal one to be sure, but she said of Flynn, Michael Flynn has shown a stunning contempt for the Geneva Conventions and other laws prohibiting torture. So Mike Flynn also described Islam as a quote-unquote cancer and a, quote, political ideology that definitely hides behind being a religion. Mike Flynn described Islamofascism, quote-unquote, as an existential threat to America, with Iran and or ISIS conspiring in a secret anti-American alliance. In his book, he proposed a foreign policy guided by, quote, insisting on the superiority of our own political vision. Whatever that is. He retweets Nazis, most notoriously this year retweeting something that referred to Hillary Clinton, which read, quote, the USSR is to blame. Not anymore, Jews, not anymore. So, I mean, I quote that because I think it sort of speaks for itself. I mean, he's a disgusting, bigoted character who's apparently still living in either the Cold War or Nazi Germany, referring to the Soviet Union for whatever reason. And so, I mean, or some combination thereof, which is, I think, probably the most disturbing outcome of them all. The next person that we know for sure will be there is Mike Pompeo, who will be the director of the CIA. And he's the Koch brothers boy. He was elected in 2010 during the Tea Party wave thanks to a massive amount of Koch brothers money. Koch Industries was the single largest donor to his campaign in 2010 at over $80,000. While the next largest donor donated $26,000. So if you look at the list, they're mostly around $15K. Since 2009, he's received $357,000 from the Koch brothers, so you kind of know where his strings go to. He wants to keep the base in Guantanamo Bay open and continue the quote-unquote enhanced interrogation methods moving. He described the prison operation there as quote-unquote lawful and humane, and described the hunger strikes among the detainees as a political stunt. He was also a defender of the mass surveillance network, and in an op-ed into the Wall Street Journal, even advocated for removing the few restrictions that already exist on torture, infinite detainment, and mass surveillance. So that's where he's at, that's where the CIA is going. And Jeff Sessions, I mean, we saw today Jeff Sessions is going to be the Attorney General. I think in a way, he might be the most egregious of all of them. He's a well-known person connected to the Klan. And in the 1980s, he became only the third person in the previous 50 years to be rejected by Congress to a federal court appointment, due, according to Ted Kennedy, to, quote, gross insensitivity to the questions of race. Outside the Democratic Party's parlance, I'll put it plain, barefaced racism, and the dude's a bigot. Many have probably already read about in the news so far how Sessions referred to the NAACP, the SCLC, and the Southern Conference or the National Conference of Churches, the three of the most high-profile civil rights organizations in the 50s and 60s, were, quote, anti-American organizations teaching anti-American values. Another McCarthyite kind of attitude. Also, Sessions, we also heard this morning in the news, Sessions referred to a black prosecutor as boy, and thought that, he said of the KKK that he thought it was okay until he found out they smoked pot.
That's the deciding.
Yeah, I mean, it's... So, I mean, in other words, the racism that prevented Sessions from becoming a judge were too much in the 80s under Reagan's government. So it kind of tells you about the political moment where this guy's going to be the liaison between the court system and the executive branch, right? And, you know, it doesn't stop there. When we've heard about the other contenders for office, right? So for Secretary of State, there are two people, Rudy Giuliani and John Bolton, who are the top runners. Rudy Giuliani, everybody knows who that is. The godfather of New York City's stop and frisk program and the modern New York Police Department, the same one that killed Eric Garner with impunity. John Bolton, he thought that George W. Bush's foreign policy was too weak and advocated for bombing Iran, a country of 80 million people. You know, it's not some small country that you can kind of walk over and bully the same way that George W. Bush was doing around the world. That would be a major war. So that's sort of where he's coming from. He was the ambassador to the UN, and later on said he alluded to the UN's ambition at becoming global government. He said that on Breitbart, which was Steve Bannon's now neo-Nazi kind of oriented news outlet. The EPA director is not looking much better. We got Leslie Rutledge and Myron Ebel. According to Politico about Leslie Rutledge, the Attorney General of Arkansas and a lead challenger of EPA regulations in the state is emerging as a leading contender for the job. Rutledge recently met with members of Trump's team at the Trump Tower, so Rutledge is kind of the front runner as it seems, but there's still Ebel, who is another climate change denier and thinks that insecticides' presence in food is a non-issue and notoriously extolled the virtues and benefits of climate change, saying that climate change is, quote, nothing to worry about. So that's completely off the wall. But I gotta say, I was a little tickled to see that Sarah Palin's in there still. It's a long shot, but she's still in the running apparently for Secretary of the Interior. I mean, it's like a rash, and no matter what you do, you can't really get rid of her. But, Sarah Palin. These are the picks and candidates for the most powerful people in the world. Mike Flynn will inherit the most powerful military machine in history, thanks in large part to Obama, actually. Climate change deniers are in charge of the world's most powerful environmental regulatory agency, and cabinet, it's important. It's important. Cabinet picks are important. They're reasonable predictors of the upcoming policy. They can reveal the specific character of an incoming government, so they can tell us what to anticipate. And so I think there are three things that we can really anticipate. One, an even greater expansion of police state powers like mass surveillance, indefinite detention, and without trial too, undeclared wars and the like. Two, we can expect complete inaction on climate change, which I think arguably is the most important threat facing humankind. And three, an even more aggressive and dangerous foreign policy, which, that might be in there for the next most dangerous thing facing us as a species. So, all of these are true to form for what the cabinet reveals about the character of the Trump administration. It's a hybrid of the fascist movement that Trump whipped up and the traditional Republican establishment of Reagan and the Bushes. That's why you see Republican Party chairman, or former chairman, I guess, soon to be, Reince Priebus serving as chief of staff alongside the neo-fascist Steve Bannon. But this meeting isn't really about just Trump's cabinet, right? It's also about the people's struggle. And so from Carolyn's talk, we know that the neoliberal order made fascism inevitable in the United States, or at least a fascist movement, a growing fascist movement. And the new political landscape is even more conducive to fascism's growth. It's also fertile grounds for class struggle, thankfully. There's a deeply divided ruling class. None of the Fortune 100 CEOs endorse Trump, the richest and most powerful people in our economy. The same factors are leading to the growth and appeal of fascism can also make, I think, socialism and a revolutionary change of our society popular. But only socialism can be a solution, and we've been saying that. We need to bring the idea of socialism to people. So, I guess in a lot of ways that sort of begs the question, what does that mean, right? It sounds like empty sloganeering to say that only socialism can defeat fascism, but we mean that, and it's not just a slogan. So, I'll tell you, I'll end on that. It's that the only way to fight fascism is to fight the policies that gave rise to the massive worldwide migration. There are 60 million people now in migration. That's the greatest number since World War II, when Europe was destroyed. And that's a consequence of massive global unemployment, the restructuring of the global economy to move manufacturing overseas. That gave rise to the deep insecurity that characterized the whole global world economy right now. And in other words, that's a basic feature of modern capitalism. If we make the struggle between only democracy and fascism, in other words, we lose that battle because we'll be standing on the same fertile soil that made fascism a popular alternative, and the basic problems of capitalist society will still be there. So it's like getting rid of tapeworms. Of course, we need to rid ourselves of the clear and present danger posed by the tapeworm itself, but the real danger is that people who get tapeworms are eating unsafe food. So if we want to make the fight about Trump, and we want to fight Trump, Steve Bannon and all the other fascists who inherit the state we can't make that about struggling for democracy. People will still be facing job loss, falling incomes, the rising cost of living, and all the other things that lead people to look to fascist ideas. So we need to make the fight between fighting fascism with socialism, because we need to make life livable. Just as being against the right wing because we're against the right wing because they're the most vitriolically hateful, bigoted people advancing this rhetoric, because they most represent the extreme versions of the policies that have already been taking place under Bush and Obama's governments. That's ineffective. We need to be talking to people. If we go to the people who voted for Trump only with the message that he's a racist or a sexist or is against people who are forced to migrate because of their political or economic conditions, we're not going to win them over. Yeah, they're going to say, yeah, I'm a racist too. Or it doesn't matter since things will get better with Trump anyway. He's going to make America great again, I guess. Or they'll tell us that we need to give them a chance, which is, I think we should be clear about that. That's an attempt to maintain the legitimacy of a system that did not give the popular vote they did not give it to the person who won the popular vote. It's an anti-democratic system. And it made Trump possible. So we have to be able to show to people that Donald Trump's platform is completely bankrupt. We need to be able to show people that, and we need to be able to get a foot in the door in every conversation and show that Donald Trump is not going to be able to do anything for poor and working people, especially the most oppressed people in this country and around the world. Tax cuts to the rich, modest investment in infrastructure can't solve the basic problems that are causing the economy to serve the rich and only the rich at the vast majority of people's expense. On the other hand, we also need to be able to fight the fascist organizations that have been emboldened by getting their man in the White House. So when we're talking about winning people over, we're not saying that we're going to knock on David Duke's door. We're not going to knock on Alex Jones's door and read together and have some nice talks over coffee. We need to fight them and their dyed-in-the-wool supporters by disrupting their meetings. We need to be able to go to every demonstration that they hold and show up and make it clear that they're not welcome in our communities or anywhere. We need to be able to say that that's because we're the majority of people. We're the oppressed and working people of the world. And there are actually very few active fascists in the United States. They've all been able to make themselves heard because they're extremely well organized, albeit divided. Protesting is a part of that. Many have cast doubt on the effectiveness of protesting and hitting the streets, but there can be no substitute for the demonstration of strength, unity, and numbers that protesting has. It's empowering for people who are on the sidelines and who are thinking the same things that we're thinking, but we're feeling isolated and afraid. But no one is saying that's the only tactic available to us. Or at least it would be ludicrous to say that protesting until things get better is our strategy. Because it won't work just like that. It's an important step in the early stages of an anti-fascist movement, of a movement for a new system, to awaken the courage in everyone who wants to fight Trump, poverty, bigotry, and state violence. But there isn't a substitute for joining a revolutionary organization. The right wing has made themselves heard by being organized in fascist groups. So we're fighting both the state, which is a highly organized group through its racist courts that let killer cops go, through the cops themselves that have taken so many black and brown lives, and the military that has ruined and destroyed so many countries around the world. But we're also fighting fascist organizations. We're entering a moment in history where we can decide what people around the world look back and remember about us and what we did in 2016 and 2017, 18, 19, and 20. They'll ask what happened to get them where they are now, and the answer to that question will be whether or not we got ourselves organized as a class. As producers, the vast majority of people uniting to fight together, whether we're black, brown, Asian, native, or white, whether we're straight or queer, no matter our gender, religion, or anything else. When we see that only we can be free when all of us are free, that's when we will be able to make a change together that could challenge and defeat fascism. the state, the capitalist system that made fascism inevitable, and the state that defends its system, and replace that system with a system where we can look out for everyone's liberation. That's why only socialism can defeat Trump. Thank you.